I served on the force for over 30 years. Mostly working the graveyard shift in a district known for narcotics and decay. You get used to the violence, but you never get used to the madness. I retired early because of one specific call. My partner, Miller, and I were dispatched to a welfare check at a dilapidated row house. The neighbors reported a smell that was getting worse by the day, describing it as sweet rot. We assumed it was a hoarder situation, or worse, a body that had been decomposing in the summer heat for weeks. When we arrived, the front door was unlocked, creaking open with a light push. The smell hit us instantly, a suffocating mix of rotting meat, old newspapers, and industrial bleach. It was thick enough to taste. We drew our weapons and announced ourselves. Police. Anybody home? But the house was dead silent. It was a labyrinth of garbage. Stacks of magazines and trash reached the ceiling, creating narrow, claustrophobic tunnels we had to squeeze through sideways. I remember the sound of cockroaches skittering away from our flashlights. We cleared the first floor and moved toward the basement door. It was nailed shut from the outside. That should have been our first red flag to turn back and call for backup. But adrenaline makes you stupid. Miller pried it open. The air rushing up from the dark was freezing cold. We descended the wooden stairs, which groaned under our weight. In the center of the basement, cleared of all trash, was a single surgical chair, rusted and stained with dark, dried fluids. But it was the walls that made me freeze. They were covered in hundreds of Polaroids, photos of people sleeping in their beds, photos of me, sleeping in my bed. Suddenly, a pile of trash in the corner exploded outward. A man, naked, emaciated, and covered in sores, lunged at Miller. He moved with the speed of a feral animal, screaming in a language that sounded like clicking tongues. He wasn't just hiding, he had built a nest. I tackled him, but his skin was greasy, and he had the hysterical strength of the insane. He bit deep into my forearm, tearing a chunk of flesh. Miller finally managed to tase him, the electric arc lighting up the dark basement. But the guy kept thrashing, smiling at us through foam and blood. We later found out he had been living in the crawl spaces connecting the entire block of row houses for 3 years. He had been watching all of us. To this day, I can't sleep without checking the vents in my own home. My partner and I responded to a silent alarm at an old funeral home on the edge of town. It was 3 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The building had been closed down for renovations for months, so nobody should have been inside. Dispatch confirmed a motion sensor trip specifically in the basement embalming room. The key holder was 20 minutes out, so we decided to clear the building ourselves. We entered through the rear service door. The place was gutted, just concrete floors, exposed beams, and plastic sheets hanging from the ceiling like ghosts. It was quiet, the kind of heavy silence that presses against your ear. We swept the ground floor and found nothing but dust. We headed down the metal ramp toward the embalming area. As we descended, the temperature dropped drastically. I could see my own breath fogging up in the beam of my flashlight. We reached the main prep room. It was stark white, smelling faintly of formaldehyde and copper. In the center, there was a heavy stainless steel table with a drain in the middle. Sitting right in the center of that empty metal table was an old-fashioned rotary telephone. It wasn't plugged into the wall. The cord was just cut, dangling off the edge of the table. We stared at it, confused. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was a loud, piercing mechanical ring that echoed violently off the tile walls. Burring, burring. My partner looked at me, his face draining of color. "That's impossible," he whispered, his hand shaking on his Glock. The phone rang again. Compelled by some urge I can't explain, I walked over and lifted the receiver. I didn't say a word. I just listened. On the other end, there was no static, just the wet, heavy sound of breathing. Slow, raspy inhalations right against the speaker. Then, a voice that sounded exactly like my own voice whispered, "Don't look up." I froze. I didn't look up. Instead, I grabbed my partner's vest and backed us out of the room, keeping my gun trained on the ceiling. As we backed through the doorway, the heavy steel fire door slammed shut by itself with the force of a car crash, locking us out. From inside the room, we heard the sound of the steel table being thrown against the wall. We waited outside in the rain until SWAT arrived. When they opened the door, the room was empty. The phone was gone. The dust on the floor was undisturbed. I was working a solo patrol in a rural county that borders a national forest. We had reports of a prowler near the old railway tunnels. These tunnels were abandoned in the 80s and were mostly used by teenagers for parties. But tonight, the fog was so thick you couldn't see the hood of your cruiser. It was dead quiet. I parked my car and walked toward the tunnel entrance, my flashlight beam cutting a weak cone through the mist. As I stepped into the tunnel, the air grew stagnant. About 50 yards in, I heard a scratching sound coming from the arched ceiling, like nails on concrete. I stopped and shouted, "Police! Come out with your hands visible!" The scratching stopped instantly. Then, a heavy mass dropped from the ceiling to the floor with a wet thud. It didn't land like a person. It landed on all fours, its limbs bent at sickening, impossible angles. It looked like a woman wearing a torn, dirty hospital gown, but her long, matted hair completely covered her face. I put my hand on my holster, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Stay down. Do not move," I ordered. She didn't listen. She began to crawl toward me, but she moved backwards, head first, limbs flailing, scuttling like a spider, but with terrifying speed. As she got closer into the light, her neck snapped back with a crack, and I saw her face upside down. She was smiling, but her mouth was too wide, stretching past where her cheeks should end, filled with too many teeth. I fired a warning shot into the dirt, the sound exploding in the enclosed space. She stopped instantly, freezing like a statue. Then, she opened her mouth and let out a sound. It wasn't a scream. It was my voice. It was a perfect recording of me saying, "Police, come out with your hands visible," followed by the sound of my radio static. She stood up on two legs, perfectly straight, her smile vanishing into a blank expression. She simply walked backward into the darkness of the tunnel, fading away like smoke. I didn't pursue her. I got back in my car, locked the doors, and drove until I hit the main highway. I put in my transfer request the next morning. This is the story that made me quit the force. I was patrolling a desolate stretch of highway that cuts through dense pine forest. It's known for deer accidents. But that night, around 2 a.m., I saw a sedan parked on the shoulder with its hazards flashing. No one was inside. The driver's door was wide open. The engine was still running, and there were muddy footprints leading into the tall grass. I called it in as a suspicious vehicle and decided to follow the tracks. I walked about a quarter mile into the woods. The atmosphere felt heavy, like the air before a tornado. The forest went silent to no crickets. No wind. I came into a small, man-made clearing and froze. Standing in a perfect circle were 12 scarecrows, but they weren't made of straw. They were dressed in modern clothes, jeans, hoodies, varsity jackets. I stepped closer to inspect the nearest one. It was wearing a mechanic's uniform. I poked it with my baton, expecting straw, but it felt solid. Flesh and bone. I shined my light on its face. It was covered by a burlap sack with eyes drawn on it in black marker. Then, the chest of the scarecrow heaved. It took a breath. I stumbled back, my mind unable to process it. I scanned the circle with my light. All of them had turned their heads slightly to look at me. They weren't scarecrows. They were people, standing perfectly still, tied to wooden posts with barbed wire. They were alive. Their eyes were wide with sheer terror, pleading for help. But I saw that their mouths were sewn shut with thick, transparent fishing line. Before I could radio for backup, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, weapon drawn. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a man of immense size, wearing a butcher's apron stained black. He was holding a sledgehammer. He didn't attack. He just put a thick finger to his lips, signaling me to be quiet. Then he pointed back toward the road. "Live," he grunted, his voice sounding like gravel, "or you join the harvest." I looked at the 12 people bound to the posts, tears streaming down their masked faces. then at the giant with the hammer. I saw movement in the trees, behind him dozens of others, watching, waiting. I was outgunned and alone. Cowardice took over. I ran back to my cruiser, tires screeching as I fled. By the time the tactical team arrived an hour later, the clearing was empty. No posts, no people, just 12 patches of disturbed earth. We never found the driver of the sedan.